Good evening. I'm Chuck Davis. I'm the executive chairperson for the Photographic Society of Northwest Arkansas, and you have arrived at the Distinguished Photographers Speaking Series tonight during National Women's History Month. Our speaker is Diana Mara Henry. Diana began her walk through history as a photo editor of the Harvard Crimson. In New York in the 1970s, she began photographing well-known individuals, photographing parties, if you will, at the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum, and during Fashion Week in New York. She turned to social issues quickly, which included the Democratic National Conventions, the campaigns of McGovern, Abzug, Reagan, Carter, marches for the ERA and Vietnam veterans against the war. Also the Women's Pentagon action, and I think you'll find curiously interesting photographs of the avant-garde art festivals, the art scene on the Lower East Side. There's also James Brown performing at Rikers Island, and all of these bring dimensions to her work. She pivots, I think, deeply in her work as the official photographer of the first National Women's Conference in Houston in 1977. Thus, you'll be seeing photographs of many of those individuals who made history, of course, in the National Women's Movement. Beyond this, her wide-ranging travel has brought a vision of human interest and adventure from Brooklyn to California to France to the Greek islands, and even traveling perhaps in time to the Natzweiler concentration camp. As I turn over this presentation to Diana Mara Henry, I'd like to give a dramatic quote by Ron Kovic, the author of Born on the 4th of July, as he introduces her book. Dear Diana, your photographs are beautiful and represent such a powerful and passionate time in American history. I believe these photographs will last, and many years from now, they will be looked at and studied, just as Matthew Brady's haunting Civil War photos are today. Thank you for being a part of this history. Perhaps one more tribute sums it all up as we start tonight. I'm so glad that you were there with your camera with great friendship, Gloria Steinem. Diana, will you begin?
Thank you, Chuck. And thank you to the Photographic Society of Northwest Arkansas for inviting me to speak. Thank you to old friends, some from grade school and high school who are here tonight, collectors and clients who gave me the work you see today, and more than a few of the people in my photographs who are attending this presentation. I wish I could acknowledge you all and tell you how much pleasure it's given me to keep in touch. Thank you to new friends and talented journalists, including Kyle Kellums, just met in the process of preparing for this presentation, and to all here today. Let's continue the conversation via email and website links, which Chuck has posted at the top of the chat box for you. Gloria Steinem is one of the few people who've been able to articulate on several occasions about my work that it is the person and not the camera who makes the photographs. And so her comments, which you'll hear at the end of the talk, have encouraged me to present my walk through history to begin with as a coming of age. This part of my life's work, which I'm showing tonight, of women and the women's movement, was formed and guided by concerns for justice and women's empowerment. Those ideals led me to be a photographer who wrote history too.
Listening to Diane.
Well, we'll check in with you later, Gloria, and she's in many of the photographs you'll see tonight. The journey started with my mother, the beautiful, dynamic, and talented designer Edith Ann Trotter Henry, and my father, whose World War II writings and other accomplishments in film and publishing are celebrated at my website, in their honor, frontseattowar.com. My mother was a role model for a far more successful creative person. My father satisfied my desire to watch North by Northwest over and over again and introduced me to avant-garde films, animation, and the construction of messaging in advertisements and media. Here he is working on Carl Henry's magazine, which was a comic magazine, although he looks so intensely serious about it. And my first camera, which he gave me at age 3. They say that a girls' school is empowering for women. And this is my class photo at Miss Doherty's School for Girls. My last year in Cincinnati in 5th grade, I went with a pack of girls to see Where the Boys Are. The film ripped apart my innocence and was a brutal introduction to the dangers of sex. There were few women at the Crimson, Harvard student newspaper, when I was a photo editor and learned photography there, but not many. Our first, one of our assignments in the competition to become a photographer or photo editor at the Crimson was to do a sex assignment. And this is how I rendered that. It's a test print. The original is in the books at the Harvard Crimson. I'll go through some photographs that I took while I was at the Crimson, which relate to my interest, which was entirely age appropriate, I suppose, for relationships. And also noticing unisex fashions, which were seen on the street in those days as today, and compared to the commercial presentation of ideal femininity in mannequins. An early color photograph, which it was rather rare at that time for me. And my first job was publicity assistant for If It's Tuesday, This Must Be Belgium, a great grade B movie. This is Suzanne Flechette. I wasn't a photographer officially, but of course I had my camera with me. I also photographed the people who were in my echelon on the film, the grips and the van drivers, and people in cafes when we were rained out from filming. And then in my last year at college, I did a slideshow as part of a Harvard House production, theatrical production of Schweik in the Second World War. And I went around Boston's North End photographing and wandered into a butcher shop. And I like to think that this is my first feminist photograph. I also think that it may have influenced the butcher to take down the poster. At least I hope that seeing it through my eyes, he would have done that. But you can see a sort of another sharper version of the poster on the cover of Carol Adams' book. After college, I worked at the Staten Island Advance as a general assignment reporter and was assigned to do a feature on the historic home of Alice Austin, a pioneering photographer of the end of the 19th and early 20th century, who's really is a role model for me. And I got involved in saving her house, which was threatened by developers, and became a part of the New York City park system, thanks to my efforts and the efforts of Peggy Buckwalter, who led the charge. A wonderful book was published by Anne Novotny, who's seen on the left, and she started the group called the Friends of Alice Austin House. And our first endeavor was to place a marker on the grave of Alice Austin. So in 1971, I gave up written journalism to become a photographer. And these were some of the photographs that I took around town as I was starting out. This one, while I was working as a staff photographer for Brooklyn Today, short-lived Metropolitan Daily in Brooklyn. And in California, at an early Renaissance fair. And around the city, including at the studio of Steve Eisenberg, whose photograph is seen on the right, while Greg Komar is photographing a model on the left in Steve Eisenberg's studio. Also another photograph for Brooklyn Today, and a part of a series that I did at Port Authority for a photojournalism class taught by Lee Romero, the great New York Times photographer. Women at work have been an interest of mine. This is in Crete also. Fashion with the, I call this the goddess on the runway, with none of the fashion editors looking at her, jaded. And office parties, who touches whom, has been an interest of mine. Rizzoli Bookstore hosted the Fashion is Fantasy fundraiser for Fountain House, a drug rehab, and the links that you have, I think, include more about that event. This was taken with an Olympus pen camera, so it's a half-frame camera. So now we'll get into some politics, which I know you've been waiting for. This is Allard Lowenstein and his wife, Jennifer. He was assassinated, and I've been in touch with the family, very graciously corresponding with me about how happy they are to have the photographs, many photographs that I took. A lot of the people in my photographs that you had, you know, said he lived long enough. Can you hear this, Chuck?
Well, it's audible, but hard to distinguish.
Hard to distinguish. Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you. This photograph was actually taken on my first real professional assignment. Werner Kramarski was Liz Holtzman's campaign manager, and he gave me the assignment to create the campaign photograph for her posters and palm cards. And she's graciously acknowledged that this photograph helped her win the election, taken on the Brooklyn Bridge, as she was a congresswoman from Brooklyn. So you can see some of the uses that were that it was put to, and then people said to her, well, you don't look like your photograph. So we did another photograph with her glasses on, which you can see later on. I started to photograph McGovern in 1972, going up to the New Hampshire on the press bus for the primaries. This is the Women's Division poster for the state of New York. And I photographed his wife, of course, Eleanor, in the public schools in Westchester. The first time I saw Bella, I had never heard a woman with a voice like Bella's. I heard it one night when I was printing in my darkroom. And over the airwaves of WBAI Pacifica Radio came her very abrasive, strong voice. I'd never heard a woman sound like that. So I ran down the next day to photograph her at her press conference. Then I went down to Miami Beach, packed up my whole darkroom, and went down to Miami Beach to photograph the Democratic National Convention. No press passes, but I met the young men who were working for Dick Tuck's reliable source, and I joined up with them on staff, all volunteer, of course. And the last night at the convention, we were able to, someone of our group picked up 5 press passes. So we had the run of the convention that night. But before that, without press passes, I was photographing around the hotels and events of the convention, including Shirley Chisholm's supporters. And here is one of my photographs of her at the podium with her male rivals for the Democratic presidential nomination. I think this is one of my best photographs. It really embodies my my love and my respect for her. She was a great woman. So as time has gone on, I have discovered the identity of some of the people, like this woman, Sally Popkin, and her group standing on top of a car at a rally for McGovern in September of '72. And her daughter wrote to me through the internet, through my website. A lot of people have identified themselves. So at a lot of events, I self-assigned. Many times, such as this, no one else was there as a photographer, but I felt that these were important causes and important moments in history, and I wanted to record them. So the New York Times was not using the term Ms., even though it was already in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And someone even got arrested at the demonstration. So I think it's a precious moment to have recorded. And I also picked up a lot of ephemera, like this press release from Majority Report at the time that was being handed out. The New York Times eventually did use the term Ms. They adopted it in 1986, 12 years after it had entered the dictionary. And this clipping was sent to me by Jan Levy. Thank you, Jan. Gloria, of course, used the photographs on her website, which was quite the honor. We're moving into a series on artists and creative people. This is Diane Stillman and Ann Beaths at their Funny Womanhood seminar, demonstrating how to throw pies. They had just published a book called Titters, which is a collection of humor by women. An avant-garde festival at the art festival at the World Trade Center, the original World Trade Center. Charlotte Moorman performing in a bag at the Museum of Modern Art. You can see my friend photographer Steve Bournes over on the left. I have many photographs of this event on my website. Some of them are X-rated, so I didn't want to present them here. Shirley MacLaine with the Ballet Trocadero de Monte Carlo. This was an assignment given to me by Anne Obert Weinberg. So I'm very grateful to her for many interesting assignments of the cultural world in New York. Amnesty International, I photographed an event for them in 1976, and I had an interesting experience. Sometimes I write to the organizations that I have photographs of to ask them if they'd like them for their archive. And when I contacted Amnesty International a couple of years ago, they said, well, actually, we don't have an archive. So nor did they express an interest in seeing my photographs, which was interesting. But it is quite remarkable that in some ways I have archives of very important organizations that haven't thought of recording what they've been doing. So Sylvia Slay, I just thought was an important artist. And I got in touch with her and went down to photograph her, I think in Greenwich Village. It was a very rewarding assignment, although, you know, these photographs have never been published, but I think it brought her and her husband pleasure as well as me. One-room schools of Vermont. I'll show a series here that I was invited to photograph this project for Earthwatch by Blue Magruder, classmate at college. This is Delphine Lafleur, who's obviously enjoying the photo session, as I enjoyed very much doing the photographs, which have been shown in numerous exhibitions. Here I am with a school teacher for the one-room schools who was taking me around, and we were enjoying a swing. So New York City, 1976, marches for the ERA. I think Lee Novick on the left, in the left photograph, maybe with us tonight. Very exciting to see her again. More of some of the signage, which may finally be coming true. On the left is a photograph that was used at the historic Tredegar Civil War Museum. You can see it on the far right in this photograph in a panel, on one of their permanent displays. Election night in Plains, Georgia. You have a link for this also. I went down to Plains to photograph with Lillian in the town of Plains. Stephen Bournes was photographing for his book, People of Plains, Georgia. The National Women's Conference in 1977 was probably my most historic assignment. Bella Abzug gave me the assignment. You can see her on the right in the bottom photo with Lee Novick, who was the conference organizer, who's holding the microphone. And on the left, Rabbi Leah Novick being celebrated at a birthday for her years later. The three torchbearers for the final march into the convention center in Houston came back to the 35th anniversary of my exhibit and of the conference in New York City. So that was quite delightful. Time magazine on the right only featured one of the three women on the cover. And a couple of notes from Betty Friedan on the official book of The Spirit of Houston, which contains 85 of my copyrighted photographs, and I hope to republish that government document soon. Stay tuned. Okay, we'll try to show a video here. A couple minutes.
Photographer Diane Henry first picked up a camera during the feminist movement. She's visiting Houston to commemorate the 40th anniversary of her most important assignment.
The National Women's Conference was the first, and so far the only, conference by, for, and about women, which was funded by the federal government.
It was an event that brought together the likes of civil rights activist Coretta Scott King, feminist leader Gloria Steinem, and poet Maya Angelou.
The 1977 conference was preceded by meetings in all 50 states. You know, hundreds of thousands of people were involved in state meetings, and then coming to Houston as a federally funded conference that presented its plan of action to the president. And that plan of action included 26 planks covering everything from the arts to credit to child abuse, domestic violence, gender equity, insurance, farm legislation. It was a very wide-ranging national program for change and implementation of fair access to American society by all women.
For the 2017 conference, the University of Houston campus is hosting panel discussions about activism, politics, and diversity. They're also looking back to 1977, And for Diana, that means digging up old photographs. Now, she's seeing the faces of people that she's formed real connections to.
Well, I'm very excited to see the three women, the young women who brought the torch for the last mile into the convention center in Houston. These women that I looked at in photographs for so many years are now people that I've met and know and love.
She believes that together they wrote history. The photographers can write history too. For Houston Public Media, I'm Tamika Weatherstone.
So my most published photograph is this one. And I always do ask that, as Chuck knows, that people identify all the people in the front row, starting with Billie Jean King. I don't know who the woman at the far left is, but Billie Jean King, Susan B. Anthony, Bella Abzug, Sylvia Ortiz, Peggy Cockernott, Michelle Searcy, and Betty Friedan. This photograph, I'll show you some of the uses of photographs, some of which make me grimace, such as the torn toilet paper roll on the cover of A Question of Sex. I actually nixed the use of my photographs on the Divided We Stand book that you see here. This is a proof of a cover that I did not agree to have my photograph used on. And then on the right is another really distorted version of it, which I saw too late to do anything about. So again, the 35th anniversary of the National Women's Conference, Gloria's signing my book. And then she asked me for a couple of books, and she bought a couple of books and asked me to autograph one of them and to dedicate it. And I said, how do I dedicate? How do I write to Gloria Steinem? And she said, just write to Gloria, Diana. So I did that. Joe Freeman provided this photograph, which is very nice. Betty Lane was the other photographer who photographed the women's movement doggedly and devotedly, probably much more than I did. She began earlier and photographed more of the abortion rights movement. But unfortunately, she passed away in 2012, way too soon. So this is a photograph that I have of her at another event that we were both at. I think I remember what event it was. Joe Freeman on the left has been an enduring source of inspiration, support, and great writing about the women's movement as well as photography. And Melba Tolliver, a wonderful friend who I photographed first at the New York State Women's Meeting, sitting at a typewriter. And she's stayed with me through thick and thin and is really an inspiration in the world of journalism. If you don't know of her work, I really recommend looking her up. And baby ERA, seen in the arms of Gloria Steinem, and then years later on the cover of her magazine with her husband, Jay. My website Spotlight page has a lot of these links to that Chuck has provided also. And I had, there's a link on my website to the stamp campaign, which I had started to see if the women of the leaders of the 1970s could be honored in US postage stamps. And when I told Liz Carpenter about this project, you see her at the bottom, she said, great, we're tired of licking the good old boys. A couple of the women have been honored in postage stamps. You can compare my photograph and the one that appeared on the stamp, but there are still others that should be honored, including Bella, of course. So now out and about in New York and elsewhere, not only women of the women's movement, but women of talent and achievement and grace and originality, like Fran Lebowitz, who asked her to photograph me to photograph her next to the God and Famous statue in Greenwich Village, but we wandered into a bookstore and she decided to pose for a picture there and grab the book and the position of the book. And Lynn Glauber, wonderful dancer who is an enduring friend as well, whose work I photographed thanks to Anne Weinberg also. Kevin Lewis invited me to come to the Museum of Modern Art, a party for Anita Luce at the Film Institute. And the photograph on the left was published in Newsweek with the caption, "Haze Gushes Over Gish." So this is me at work. This was a party at the 21 Club for Susan Watson's birthday party. And usually when I was photographing at a party, someone would say, "Can I take a picture of you?" So this was the fortunate result at this party. Bartle Bull, the second, was the publisher of the Village Voice. And here's Susan Watson on the left, who doesn't seem to be having as much fun as I was. And I'm sorry, I miscaptioned this. It's Diane von Furstenberg, and a man I called for years an acolyte until someone told me it's Andre Leon Talley, who's now a celebrated fashion force himself. Jane Fonda, promoting women, her film 9 to 5, appeared as the speaker for a rally of the women office workers. And then you see her on the left at the opening of On Golden Pond with her husband, Tom Hayden. So at these events, as you saw, I often picked up the ephemera that were being handed out or that I received as invitations, press releases, and so on, which I think are an important part of the history as well. This was the 9 to 5 invitation promo. New York Feminist Art Institute celebrating the placement of a statue by Louise Nevelson at the World Trade Center, the former World Trade Center, with Gloria Steinem also speaking at that event. A demonstration at Rockefeller Center in support of the women of Iran in 1979. And I'm sorry, I don't know the photographer of the photograph at the left, showing the women of Iran at that time protesting when the Shah was relieved of his power and the mullahs came in. These women were protesting the imposition of Sharia law and of the veil. Other people seen at that demonstration, Gloria, of course, on the right, and also in the photograph on the left, you can see her in the crowd along with Betty Lane, who's sort of in the center foreground, and the wonderful photographer and writer Bernard Gottfried with the camera to his face. So here's the quote that Chuck was nice enough to read from Ron Kovic. And in 1971, I photographed a demonstration against the invasion of Cambodia, women on Park Avenue. And I'll end with this series of the Women's Pentagon Action, women in numbers so great that we were able to surround the Pentagon, which is about a mile in circumference, and challenge people going in and out as to their role in the war industry. On the left, upper left, is photograph that continues to create, as does the whole event, a lot of interest. I get a lot of requests from France, interestingly enough, from women's groups for this photograph. And on the in color is the photograph that Amy Trompeter, who created the puppets, chose for her website, among others, of the event, of her puppets at the event. A young woman was arrested for doing the graffiti that you see here, rendered impotent under active women. Her name is Danielle Notaro, and I sent her the photograph, and she sent me a letter, and we're still in touch. It's really a joy to be in touch with these people in my photographs. So I'll just end with some information here that I have about Viney Burroughs, the Grande Dame of Broadway, still performing to this day. She's on the cover of my book, Women on the Move, and I have another book called A Life in Photography. And if you don't mind, I'll end with this video.
Listening to Diana, you can see the inclusive, careful, thoughtful, humane, humorous spirit that is behind the camera that makes the photographs as universal as they are, right? I mean, a different person would have produced a much more limited record.
So thank you very much, Gloria, and thank you all. I would love to hear if anyone has questions, and I'll end with that one because that's the beginning of one of my books, but it's also a way to get out of the screen, perhaps. Are we there? Okay. So I thought maybe what we could do is look at the slide sorter. And that might be a way for people to remember if there's a photograph that they would like me to talk about more, or questions, whatever. So can you see that, Chuck?
Yes, perfectly.
Great, great.
And we do have a question.
Yes,
It's from Megan Norman.
yes.
How would you compare women at work in Crete against those in the US?
Oh, well, I wish I knew more about women at work in Crete. Give me a chance to go there for a few weeks and I'll let you know. I really would love it. These photographs, the woman in the with the carrying the branch with leading the donkey was actually when I went to Heraklion and rented a car for a couple of days, I was provided with a map. And so as I was driving around with this map, I realized that some of the roads on the map didn't exist, but I didn't know why. I thought I was lost. So I just turned the car off because there were very few people, and I'd wait, and eventually someone like this woman would come along and I'd point to the place on the map I was going, and they'd tell me go right or go left. And when I got back to Heraklion, to the car rental place, I said, what's with this map? I couldn't find these roads. And they said, well, we printed the map with roads that are going to be built eventually. So that was a puzzling experience and a really wonderful experience. But yes, I'd like to ask you that question too. So maybe we can come back to you if you want to write that down. What thoughts were occurring to you when you saw that?
There are two questions that are somewhat similar.
Okay.
One's from Brandon Jennings and the other again from Megan Norman. They both have to do with your images being used out of context, perhaps without your complete permission.
Interesting. So I always ask if they're published that they be published with a copyright notice. Photographs are copyrighted from the moment of creation. However, as Megan pointed out, they are often grabbed, especially now with the internet, they're often grabbed from the internet and used without even my permission. And you're right. Sometimes it's a surprise. For instance, the Women's March in January 2017, the National Women's March website featured my photograph of my most published photograph at the top banner of every page. Without my permission and without my credit. And I wrote to all the people on the committee, including Linda Sarsour, and I said, you know, this is theft. Use without permission of a photograph is theft. And the photographs came down within an hour. They were gone. So, you know, sometimes people are willing to work with me. A lot of times not. Unfortunately, many times, women and feminist organizations have used these photographs without regard to even ask me. And when I do ask for credit, they have been vindictive and punitive. So it's been an interesting journey. I sometimes think otherwise of my interest in this than I did before I had that experience. Thank you for asking.
You probably saw a pop-up indicating question from Peter Rabinowitz.
Oh, hi, Peter.
It's a great question. It's a great question. You'll love this. So if one of your photographs could be selected to capture your life's work, when perhaps you would win belatedly a Pulitzer Prize, which photograph would that be?
Wow. I think, you know, my ex-husband used to say, let the curators write about your work. Let them choose. I suppose they would choose, you know, they would choose the March into Houston or my photograph, which I don't think has been seen here tonight, of the three First Ladies and Bella holding up the torch at the beginning of the first National Women's Conference. That one was published in the Best of Photojournalism for a Newsweek book in 1978. And I suppose that one represents something, you know, dramatic and positive. But, you know, like I said, I love the photograph of Shirley Chisholm, the photograph of Liz Holtzman on the Brooklyn Bridge, and so many others that, you know, the woman leading the man on the leash at the World Trade Center, I think has a lot of meaning for people. So leave it up to you, Peter. Thank you. Thank you for your support. And for Peter wrote to me that we know each other since '76 when he asked me to photograph, I think, for the New York State Commission on Human Rights. So nice to see you here, or at least know you're here. Any other questions? I've gone, I don't hear anything.
Everything's working just fine.
Oh, great.
It appears, however, that questions may have slowed down.
Okay.
And possibly we could end not on a question, but an accolade from Allison Howell. And she says, I think with vigor, that Diana, you are a legend.
Thank you, Allison. Thanks for your support of my work, too. It's very precious, very, very precious. Oh, Susan's here. Susan is the daughter of Anne Weinberg.
Another accolade then from Megan Norman. Diana, you are a treasure.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored that you came tonight. And I hope we'll all keep in touch. And my photographs are available. They're used in films. They're used on TV programs. Recently, there was a program called Mrs. America. And this was a new one for me. One of their art directors called me and said that he loved my website and they were poring over it for the ephemera that I presented, because they wanted to recreate the look of materials from the 1970s for this program about Phyllis Schlafly. And so I said to him, well, are you using any of my photographs? Or, you know, and he said, no. And I said, well, are you paying me a research fee for the use of my materials that you're going to be basing your designs on? And he said, no. So that was another spin on the intellectual piracy that's going on. And that's probably been going on for centuries, but.
Well, there's a request for some advice. My daughter hopes to be a lobbyist for women's rights after graduation. Any suggestions?
Well, you know, I found it very helpful to work on campaigns. I mean, I really, you know, made friends that way and learned a lot about the field. If not a campaign, then, you know, an office of an organization that speaks to her interests. I think it's great that a mom is supporting her her daughter. You know, my parents were very supportive financially, but they had a lot of reservations about what I was doing in terms of where it would lead and would I find a nice man to marry and so on. So I remember exactly the moment where I was standing in my apartment when I realized that my parents would probably never, you know, fully understand or endorse what I was doing, and then I would go on without that. And I think eventually, you know, anyone who's committed to their field is, you know, has to satisfy themselves first. And so if she feels strongly, she'll do fine. Thank you, Mom.
A few more comments and are popping in. You can probably see them yourself, Diana. I'll read them, however.
I don't see them, but I see people raising their hands. So I see Lynn. Yeah, thank you for moderating this.
It's great to see you, Diana. Thanks for your lovely and educational presentation. That's from Jill Clark.
Oh, thank you, Jill. Jill and I are involved in another project, which concerns my second career, which is researching and writing about the concentration camp Natzweiler, as you mentioned in the introduction, and the political prisoners imprisoned there during the Second World War.
There's another comment about you following your beliefs. And I believe this is attributed to Megan's daughter, who says she's learning to be a teen advocate for Planned Parenthood.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, I think something that's really lost today from public view to a great extent is the terrible, devastating problem of child abuse and the damage done. And I would love to see more women and men really creating programs and education about the lifelong devastation of the terrible effects of incest and other types of abuse. So please, whoever has energy, please consider the children.
Change in focus, perhaps. What artists, makers, and photographers inspire you? This is from Allison Howell.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Allison. Well, when I was growing up, a lot of my education at the Crimson consisted of looking at books of photography, and they almost never included women. So my excitement at discovering the work of Alice Austin led me to want to create a book on women photographers, the great underrated or unknown women photographers, such as Edward Weston's muses, who were also wonderful photographers that he did not acknowledge except as bed partners, like Tina Modotti and Sonia Noskoyak and Margaret Mather. And for me, another photographer I admire very much, including her writings, is Giselle Freund. And so those are some women I think to look up and look up to. And Alice Austin, of course.
Diana, it's been wonderful spending this hour with you. Thank you so much for your gifts to the community here in Northwest Arkansas and beyond. I think the future is female, and your past as well. So thank you so very much. Good night, everyone. Have a
Thank
great
you,
evening.
Chuck. Good night
Bye-bye.
to everyone.
Bye-bye.